G'day everybody, and welcome to the first Sunday in Lent. I hope whatever your sense of the tradition of this is, that you're making opportunity to find something in this season, a renewed focus, an opportunity to find out what is essential as we head towards Easter and that most fabulous turning point in the history of the world and in eternity itself. So my questions this morning, as we reflect a little bit on the passage, and I'm not going to read it for you. I wonder if you might pause and read it yourself and see what jumps out of the scripture for you. It's Matthew 4, verses 1 to 11. And as is often the case, it is basically beginning this season with Jesus in the wilderness. This is where Jesus is called, driven by the Spirit, into the wilderness, and he is seemingly alone, and he faces temptation. 40 days, which is where we get this 40 days of Lent idea from. And we want to identify with that in some way, or at least learn from it. Now, this might sound strange to you, but I find a connection between this week's reading and last week, which was the Transfiguration. That amazing, and we even have experiences for that, words for this, don't we? A mountaintop experience and a wilderness experience. And we think of those as almost contrasts. You know, that's the high points of life, and these are the low points of life. And yet, there's something that links them. And it's in that phrase that we came to last week, where the disciples, after all this amazing and mystical and spectacular revelation about who Jesus is, were afraid. And he touches them and says, "Do not be afraid." And they looked and saw Jesus only, himself alone. Jesus only, himself and alone. Everything else is stripped away. That's part of the experience of Lent for us. All the extra stuff, good, bad, indifferent, whatever it may be, gone. And only Jesus is what they see. And they were afraid. Isn't that a strange thing? That we would have a mountaintop, we long for the mountaintop experiences, and yet in some ways we are afraid of those. And Jesus says, do not be afraid. He is there, and that's the only focus. He is the only focus that we need. And so we come to this wilderness experience, and there we find, again, Jesus himself, only, alone. Everything else is stripped away, and Jesus in this experience finds out what it is for him to be alone with the Father. And I wonder what we would consider about that. I am a child of the 60s, and therefore did my maturing, part of it, in the 70s. Marched with the students against the Razor Gang, and I had a Renault 12 with a No Dams Save the Wilderness triangle, green sticker on the back. I don't know if you remember that. You know, let the Franklin flow, let the wildlands be. I'd never been there. Part of me loved the wilderness, the idea of the wilderness at least. But part of us is also afraid of the wilderness. That's very much a part of the Australian psyche. You know, we love the idea of the wilderness. But do we want to go there? Do we want to go there alone? We romanticize the idea of solitude and the beauty of this, but we are also afraid of it. Do we need to know that when we strip everything else away and we find ourselves in the wilderness, that it can be, in fact, an empowering and an amazing and a strangely beautiful experience, if in that we encounter Jesus himself alone. Only Jesus himself alone. Because in the wilderness, there's contrast. There is amazing contrast. And maybe that's part of this thing between the yearning and the longing in our hearts, but the fear in our hearts as well. In the wilderness, particularly in the desert, the Judean desert is no different. There's enormous contrast between light and shade, between what is a cool resting place and where you might even find water compared to out there in the blistering heat of the rocks and that white glaring sand and stone. Yet there are places of shade and comfort and pausing and resting, and they become so important. So, the wilderness, do you really want to go there? I'll leave that question with you. Jesus was driven by the Spirit. He, in fact, had to go there. And I wonder, if we say we follow Jesus' example, we need to go there. And in a society that loves air conditioning, climate control, manicured lawns, nice decor, comfy seats when we gather to worship, etc., etc. We like the idea of the wilderness, of having all those extraneous things stripped away to encounter Jesus, to be with God alone. I think we need to go there. Now, if you are using the Journey with Jesus, Lent Reflections, prepared by the Synod, and some of us were involved in that, there's a reflection this week that suggests that Jesus' experience is in some ways a rite of passage. And I think that's an interesting thing to ponder, because I think it's also something that we like the idea of, but we have lost the reality and we are afraid to go there. At this time of year in the ancient church, the preparations for baptism was definitely a rite of passage, an actual rite of passage. I don't know that we really hold much of that in the church anymore. Perhaps we need to think on our own personal faith journey and see what our rites of passage may have been. These turning points, these milestones in our responding to God. And if that is part of what's happening to Jesus there, I'm thinking about something a good friend of mine, Michael Knight, spoke about. And Michael works with young people finishing high school and moving into their lives. And so for him, an understanding of rites of passage is actually very important. He's done a lot of work in this area. And I thank you for this, Michael. Michael says that in ancient cultures and in, interestingly, cultures that are stripped of all our modern conveniences, rites of passage have about 5 significant markers that make for a genuine rite of passage. So getting your driver's license is not a rite of passage. Confirmation in the church is not a rite of passage. Getting drunk at schoolies is not a rite of passage. Some of the things that significantly make this, it is a matter of choice. It is something that you choose to engage in, and you can choose not to. There it is. But it is something that you've been invited into by someone you trust, an elder, a more senior person, a person who knows and understands and says, I think now is the time for you. So you are invited into, but the choice remains yours. It is something that you will ultimately have to do alone. This is a deeply personal thing. There are others who can help you prepare for this, but you will have to do this thing on your own. It is in fact a great challenge and includes a physical challenge. Now, whether that's killing a lion or, spending a night out in the snow, whatever. That's the stuff we're talking about. That this is something that actually costs you. This will be something that will test you. Do we have a sense of that in our journey with Jesus? It is also something that will physically mark you. You will be different, visibly different after this. So in some of our indigenous cultures, there's a question of scarring, so that somebody who actually carries the marks of their rite of passage, it's obvious to everyone. How does that sit with us in our faith journey? And the other thing that is the ongoing and ultimate result of this is that your purpose in life changes. Your place in the community changes. If we think of this as a young man or a young woman moving into adulthood and maturity, you can't go away to this experience and then come back with your dirty laundry and leave it for mummy to do, because that's what she does. It changes who you are. You take on new responsibilities as a maturing person, as an adult, as whatever that may be, within your tribe, within your community. And how does that look for us within the church? So if Jesus is engaging in a rite of passage here, then yes, he is called to this by the one who loves him and knows him ultimately. And there is choice for him. This is the moment after his baptism. He knows who he is. What's next? This will leave a mark on him. There's no question about that. After 40 days, I reckon, it was the whole Jenny Craig experience for sure. Dirty, emaciated, hungry. It's a physical challenge, obviously. I mean, there's a huge challenge in this for him. But part of that challenge is actually to walk away from the green comforts of Galilee and go into the Judean wilderness deliberately. And it will change what he does, his purpose in life. Now that he knows who he is, he will now be beginning his ministry and that journey to the cross. Hold those thoughts and see how they might reflect for us as community and for each of us within that. All the best, and however it is you plan to gather with others today and mark the Lord's Day, be blessed in that. I hope we'll see plenty of you this evening at the park from 4:30 as we gather to be a part of the community, to be people who take the community of God's people and offer it into the wider community around us. It's nice to be together. It's the last Sunday of summer, but the purpose of this is for us to be stepping out, stripping away all the stuff that's comfortable to us, doing prayers and hearing a sermon and all that kind of stuff that we do behind four walls, and to go and be the people of God in the park, publicly, and hopefully meeting other people, saying g'day, hearing their story, sharing ours. Every blessing this week. There'll be Matthew on Monday tomorrow, and midweek Psalm will be with us as well. See you soon.